If you ever find yourself too comfortable, I recommend learning some history. And I don't just mean like the history that you learn in high school history class. I'm talking about the deep history of the modern era. Talking about looking beyond the standard narratives that are provided for us that give us this sense for what it is to be Canadian or American or whatever nationality you happen to be. There's a kind of secret history that happens that's not really secret, but it's not really taught to people because, well, it's uncomfortable, it's unsettling, it makes one's national pride just kind of dry up and evaporate. The obvious example here is the history of, colonialism in the North American continent. The standard story, of course, is the one of the Pilgrims, the noble Christopher Columbus coming over and discovering America, this wild, untamed, and uninhabited land, and coming and finding people who inhabited it and teaching them things and bringing Christianity and bringing all these wonderful things of the civilized world to these noble savages. But that's obviously not what happened. The people who were here were pretty happy not having Columbus and his ilk show up, not having them enslaved, not having their faith beaten out of them, not having them basically genocided. Because yes, the history of North America and the Western civilization in general is one of a lot of genocide, a surprising amount of genocide. I would say, I would hazard to assert too much genocide. And that's just the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of other things that are unsavory, unsettling, and downright disgusting about the way the modern world was constructed. And, well, it's all there. All the information is available. It's just that you have to go digging. Because, of course, the standard narrative, the story that you're taught in high school, is not one that's going to tell you the full story. There's a vested interest in the stability of society as it is in teaching you this false history, this alternative version of events that excludes all the genocide and the murder and the rape and the pillaging and the all that sort of stuff. Of course, people don't want to hear it as well, so there's a resistance to actually go looking for it, and when the truth is revealed, well, people don't really want to believe it either. They would rather prefer their noble, patriotic story of the nation's birth. It also serves as a cover for white privilege, because, yes, the history of these genocides is a racialized one. It's one of the white man showing up and taming this otherwise untamed world, but the world didn't need taming. It was just fine the way it was. It was conquered, however, and we are the descendants of that conquering society. And even if we ourselves are not active participants in that colonialism, in that genocidal society, we're still beneficiaries of it, and we're still steeped in the history of that colonial society. The world that you see around you is a product of colonialism. It's a product of the way that our civilization was built. And it's hard to overstate exactly how much of an impact that has on our lives and our relationship with others, our relationship with the world at large, the relationship with nature. It's established a very strongly hierarchical way of thinking about the world, where we think of ourselves as being on top of everything. Humanity is the be-all and end-all, the top dog of the world, and then animals are below that, and then so on and so forth. But also within humanity, there's this hierarchy of the white man on top, and then coming down from beyond that is everybody else. But the world's not really like that. For one thing, race isn't a real thing. From what we know about genetics, we're all of the same race. We're all the same human beings. The only thing that's different about us is some slight skin coloration, some hereditary traits, and, well, culture. Culture is the big thing that differentiates us. And there's a lot more in common about culture than it might initially seem. One of the tricks of colonial power is to set our civilization's norms as normal. The white man's world is the normal way to do culture, the normal way to organize a society, the normal way to be. And anybody who doesn't conform to that is seen as a failure to reach that same normal society. Even if it is a perfectly valid, normal culture in its own right, if it doesn't match perfectly white man culture, then it's a failure. And we need to civilize these people to bring them into the white man's world. And of course, great violence is done in this regard. Anyone who doesn't conform to the rational, noble white man's world with its capitalism and its individualistic hierarchical norms, well, they need to be subjugated. They need to be taught a lesson. They need to be instructed in the ways of the white man so that they can fit in, so that they can be successfully integrated into the normal society. And these fake stories about history are one of the main ways that this is done. If people can't remember their history, if they can't remember why it is that the world is the way that it is, it's easy to convince people that it's always been like with this. It's a natural course of history that has brought us to this moment, and this is the only way that it could be, and this is the best way that it could be, which obviously is not correct. There is different ways of constructing a society, and the other existing societies is evidence of that. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to go the way that it's going, but yet this is the way that the powers that be prefer it. So they teach this false history that construes the normal as the normal. But the crimes and atrocities that these stories wallpaper over aren't just buried in distant history. They're also modern. The American Empire, for example, has participated in countless coups and covert regime changes and all sorts of meddling in foreign affairs, all sorts of things that are on the public record, but not exactly front of mind when one thinks about the American Empire. The Americans think of themselves as the world police, the good guys in every conflict, but no, they're out for their own interests just like any other imperial power. They're there to secure resources for America, and depending on where the resources are that are currently in demand, well, that's where the war goes. And so in the 1970s, you end up in South America. In the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, it's in the Middle East because, well, oil. And, well, now that oil's starting to go away, we're starting to see lithium become the next big thing, and so back to South America we go. The coup of the democratically elected socialist government in Bolivia that happened a couple of years ago, well, that was almost certainly backed by American powers. Elon Musk's tweet about this is somewhat telling. "We will coup whoever we want," he says. Obviously, he wants that lithium, and the socialist government, the leftist government that was democratically elected, once again, in Bolivia, was not going to be very amenable to selling it at a criminally low rate. And so, of course, there was a coup. The democratically elected government of the nation is swept away, a military dictatorship with Western-educated and Western-backed capitalists put in place. And then a couple of years later, the next elections, well, they put the leftists back in power. Great. If you look through the historical record of the last century or so, at least after World War II, America has a pretty robust history of kicking leftist, left-leaning governments out of power and installing Western-backed, capitalistic, right-leaning autocrats into power. Many of these regime changes were as part of Cold War machinations. Soviet-backed governments obviously were a target for America, given that they were the rival superpower of that era. But basically any government that resisted American dominance, the invasion of foreign powers, the colonization by economic influences, basically the neoliberal agenda, any government that resisted that would be effectively tossed out so that a more amenable regime could be put in place. And the results of that are pretty disturbing. Many of the civilizations in these regions have been effectively demolished. They've been turned into American puppet states, but they don't gain all of the benefits of being Americans. They simply have to do their bidding. This is a new form of colonialism. Gone are the days when it's overt control by foreign powers, and now it's economic control. The military comes in to throw out a quote-unquote dictator who really isn't a dictator at all, and then American corporations show up and, oh, well, there's all these resources laying around, we might as well just pick those up, and, well, since we spent all that money in the war, well, we might as well recoup our losses by building American industries here. Yes, yes. And, oh, I see that your infrastructure has been demolished into rubble by something. Well, we better help you out there. We're willing to give you a loan, of course, in order to pay for that, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth.
And so on and so on.
And they get away with it. They get away with it because there's plausible deniability. There is the ability to tell the standard American story, the standard story of being the good guys, the noble white man saving the rest of the world from their own whatever it is, and they can sleep at night because they've been told a lie. The narrative overrides reality. Canada, of course, is no different. We've got our own colonial past and present, and it continues to be a horrific problem in Canadian society. We have, in the same way that America has an overrepresentation of blacks in the prison system, we have an overrepresentation of Aboriginals. We have all sorts of folks that are disadvantaged, that don't have clean water in their communities, that don't gain the benefit of being part of Canadian society, but yet they're subjugated. They're colonized by Canadian society nonetheless. It's utterly shameful, the degree to which people are disadvantaged simply for not being white, even still in the 21st century. We like to think we live in a post-racial world, a post-colonial world, but it's nothing of the sort. We still have the same histories ongoing continuously because we believe that it's over. The story has told us that we are now the good guys, but we never were and we never will be. There are no good guys because this is not a story. Part of what's got me thinking about this is that the documentarian Adam Curtis just released a series of documentaries, a 6-part series called I Can't Get You Out of My Head. I've watched the first 2 parts so far, and it details the history of, well, basically the rise of the neoliberal era and this hyper-individualism that's really come to dominate our current society. His obsession is with narrative, with these ideas of the stories that people tell themselves, this simplified version of the world that can allow people to understand a complex world, that replace, that take over the complexity outside of their own heads, and policies being set based on this simplified world, based on effectively a lie. And unless we learn about the lie, unless we learn about some of the real story, as much of it as we possibly can, well, we're complicit in it. We're not going to be able to stand up and resist it, of course. So we need to learn about this history. We need to know more about how we got to where we are now, and maybe then we might be able to figure out how to change it, how to move on from this place, how to build a society that doesn't oppress people, that doesn't continue to live out these nightmares, these living dreams of a colonial past that never really ended. Anyway, Slander has some words for you. Hi, we do these videos daily, so if you like this content, hit the like button and share the channel and subscribe to it and, all those algorithmic things, and thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.